The bell above the cafe door tinkled like a small verdict. Steam braided the air with the smell of roasted beans and buttered pastry, and the light from the street painted the tired gold a tired gold. Anna moved between tables with the practiced rhythm of someone who had memorized the weight of porcelain and the right way to set a napkin so it did not look used. Her palms still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and cinnamon from the morning rolls. The corner table was her marker, a small island where she could glance up and see the whole room. She dreamed quietly of classes at night school, a diploma that might open a door she had never dared knock upon, and she kept her hopes tucked like coins in a pocket that rarely saw daylight. Her face wore the economy of emotion that years of small graces forced upon her. Every Tuesday, like weather, a man came in that changed the room. He entered with shoes that made no scrape on the floor, a suit so impeccable it caught the light, and a shadow of perfume that smelled like cedar and distant smoke. He sat always at the corner table that faced the door, as if he wanted to measure arrivals and departures. Two men with expressionless faces and wide shoulders lingered near his chair like sixth punctuation. People noticed him and then pretended not to notice, the cafe breathing around his presence. He ordered one thing only, a short black coffee, and took it without sugar. His eyes were a quiet catalogue of careful choices. The city outside bumped and rushed, but inside there was the soft clink of teaspoons and the hush that came when someone wore weight. Anna served him more out of habit than design, steady hands delivering his cup across the same small path. He acknowledged her sometimes with a slight nod, sometimes with silence, but always with that watchful focus that made a spoon sound louder. Weeks stitched into months with that same pattern, until one heavy Tuesday the rhythm broke. The lunch rush arrived like wind, trays trembled under too many orders, and a boy delivering a paper napkin cart bumped a chair. A tray tipped. Glasses spun like small planets, the heat of coffee gushed and painted a dark, steaming stain across the immaculate suit. Time hesitated. The room inhaled. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." "It is fine." Pause. His voice was low but not sharp. "Sorry, miss." He kept his head down. "Calm down, everyone," said the manager, wiping a hand on her apron. "Here, hold this," offered a towel. "Watch your hands," growled a bodyguard as he stood. "I can clean it. I will cover, I promise." "Stop," he said, and his hand reached for her wrist, not to seize but to steady. Anna felt the warmth of his palm and the cool shock of being noticed. "Touch a small rope that pulled her from the edge of a public shame, Marco." "It is okay," he whispered, and the words landed like an odd benediction. The cafe hummed back to life, but the question lodged like a seed. Why would someone like him say something so small and soft? The moment after the accident opened like a cracked door. The heat of the spilled coffee mixed with the sharp metal of fear, and the citrus of sanitizer clung to Anna's skin. The bell chimed again, and conversations resumed as if stitched to the old pattern, but the corner table had become an axis. Marco did not rise to lecture. Instead, he pushed a generous bill into the saucer and left a message with his driver, Paolo, a small folded note with a line that said she should not lose her job. His voice had a strange softness when he had said it, and later he repeated a phrase that would thread through weeks. "I cannot help myself," and the cadence of those words became a private echo. From that day, the cafe had a new rhythm. Customers watched the way Anna moved with a new tilt of attention. Rosa, the manager, brought her an extra roll without charge, and Louis, the barista, winked like someone who had adopted a small secret. Backstory. Anna had grown up in a narrow apartment above a laundromat, where the hum of machines was a constant metronome, and her mother worked double shifts to keep bills from piling. As a child, she learned to fold shirts so they would look like small presents, and to listen for coins falling into a metal box. School had been loving yet short-lived because the need for wages was louder than any scholarship. She took the cafe job at 18, kept her head down and her plans quiet. Nights she studied alone under a lamp, filling a notebook with vocabulary and accounting basics, saving nickels and refusing to let the world see how much she wanted a different kind of life. Her father had left when she was 10, and left behind a habit of apologizing for things that were not hers. That absence taught her to value ordinary safety, to cherish the small and steady things. Over time, she had learned that work could be both comfort and chain. Her neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez and Javier, knew her schedule and brought casseroles when she was exhausted. Her friend Lucia from the laundry would sometimes drop off a sweater and a laugh. She had a small radio that played soft songs on Sundays and a habit of inhaling the first sip of coffee as if the taste contained instructions. Those private rituals were anchors, and they explained why she held so tightly to the normalcy of the cafe, even when a man like Marco began to alter the air. The days that followed stitched their own quiet scenes. He started leaving notes, sometimes a folded corner of paper with an observation, a single line in small, neat handwriting. Once it was the name of a pastry she had placed wrong. The paper smelt faintly of tobacco and leather. He sometimes paid for a meal and asked no questions. They shared a single joke once about a crooked saucer, a small exchange that made her laugh in a way that surprised her own throat. They met in the narrow space between the counter and the corner table, where the air smelled of steam, milk, and cut lemons. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice pulled images into focus, like hands arranging frames. Scene of growing connection, dialogue sequence with 10 exchanges to unfold their small trust. Marco, you look tired today. His voice was careful. Anna, always a little. She set another cup down. Marco, do you like cinnamon? He asked, pointing to a plate. I love it, but I am careful with sugar. Will you taste this? He offered a small pastry. I could not accept that. Please, it is nothing, insisted he, and his eyes stayed without the usual shield. What do you want in return? She tried to sound light. Nothing, except your truth, he said, and the words felt as if they might break. My truth is I want school and quiet mornings, she admitted. Then go to school, he said plainly. How would I manage the cost? She asked, her voice small. Leave the numbers to me, he said, and folded his fingers like a promise. Why would you offer that? He looked away for a long breath and then met her gaze. Because it feels right, he whispered. I cannot help myself. The city, however, was not patient with small comforts. One evening, as Anna walked home, the streetlight buzzed and the smell of wet asphalt rose where rain had just stopped. A man bumped her from behind, and words that were not polite spilled from him. She turned, and the man laughed, but under the streetlight, 2 silhouettes formed, and a familiar car idled. Paolo leaned out and held the door as if it was a stage. A bodyguard named Enzo stepped close, and the stranger stepped back. The sense of being watched became protection chained to unease. Anna felt safe and exposed at the same time. The touch of Paolo handing her a damp umbrella, the distant sound of a siren like a throat clearing. Marco was there then, like an island in a storm. He did not speak much, but his presence rearranged the air. The man who had mocked her walked faster away, and the rain began again, like someone washing things clean. First moment of tension, 540 characters. The alley turned narrow and smelled of oil and last night's cardboard. A shout broke the quiet, and 3 figures lunged from shadow. Anna felt a scalding fear rise like metal in her chest. Hands grabbed at her bag and her arm, the world reduced to fabric and breath. Marco arrived in a sudden way, as if he had stepped out of the walls. He moved calm but quick, his voice a low order. The torchlight caught his face, and for a moment, vulnerability slid across it, then hardened. His guards closed in like shutters, and the attackers retreated into the dark. The alley smelled of rain and coffee and adrenaline. They began to talk more openly, but not without complication. Marco revealed fragments of a life threaded with power, men who counted favors in silence and debts settled with blood. He told a story once about a childhood near the docks, a father who taught him not to trust the steady gaze of men in suits. His confession arrived as a whisper, and it rattled Anna more than any gun could have. She had to choose whether to step closer into a world where protection looked like containment. A small-scale incident at the market made that choice urgent. Anna was followed one afternoon by a man who would not leave her alone, his breath like stale cigarettes. She ducked into a food stall where the smell of frying oil and cilantro wrapped around her like a blanket. The man pushed through the crowd and reached for her shoulder. Marco was there before the contact completed, his bodyguards like a wall, his voice a blade. Words were exchanged, swift and clipped, loud enough for people to look. A bodyguard named Bruno put a hand on the man and then placed a palm against Anna back as if to claim her right to stand. Protection here was a physical fact and a public message. Second moment of tension, 580 characters. The market felt crowded with sounds of voices, frying oil, and the rustle of plastic bags. Suddenly, the world narrowed to a small frame, the stranger's hand closing near Anna's shoulder. Her heart hammered against ribs as if to break loose. A voice cut through the noise, and in seconds, the man found himself face to face with two large men whose eyes were as flat as stones. Marco's jaw was tight, his hands steady and firm. The crowd leaned away like seaweed from a rock. The man spat words and left. Silence fell heavy as the smell of coriander and frying bread. Confrontation came months later when the press began to bring rumors. A reporter at the corner of the street asked loud, probing questions, and a detective named Ramirez showed up in a courthouse discussion that smelled of paper and coffee. Marco was accused of things that had nothing to do with Anna and everything to do with the orbit he kept. He offered her a choice: stay and accept that his world would color hers, or leave and keep the tame life she had fought for. They sat across from each other in a small, private room at the rear of the cafe where the light was thin and the dust motes moved like slow confessions. Confrontation dialogue sequence with dense exchanges. "Anna, you want me to choose?" he said, looking small. "I want you to be safe," he replied. "Safe, in your world, is different from my safe." She pushed her cup away. "I know," he admitted softly. "If I stay, will I lose myself?" she asked. "You could. I cannot promise otherwise," he said honestly. "Then why ask me to stay?" He leaned forward. "Because I do not want you to go. Because I cannot help myself," he said, and his voice stripped away a layer. "So this is about you, not me?" she whispered. "It is about both of us," he said, and reached to touch her wrist, the same small gesture that had once steadied her. Anna felt everything tilt, and the question of love and power hung between them like a fragile glass. Then the true test came a month later when Anna was taken. A rival faction moved with cruelty, carelessness, and found her walking home alone. The city that had once seemed protective narrowed into headlights and shouted names. She felt a blind cover of cloth and hands that smelled like cheap alcohol. The ride smelled of leather and fear. She kept her eyes closed and cataloged sounds. The rattle of a loose screw, the steady thump of her own heart, a faint whine from the tires. Her phone lay on the seat like a mute witness. She tried to control breath and keep a thread of thought. Climax sequence, long, tense scene with rescue dialogue and action. Voice in the dark. "You should not have gone out alone." It was a taunt. "Please," she could not see. Her words trembled. "Where is he?" the voice demanded. Another voice? "Nobody knows," they said, uncertain. Marco's arrival felt like thunder, and then precise motion. Paolo took the wheel while Enzo and Bruno moved with practiced speed. "Let her go now," he commanded, his tone cold and small and deadly. "Attacker, who are you to order us?" A laugh that did not reach eyes. "I am the man you will answer to, now." His words did not need to be loud. The result was sharp and immediate. There was the sound of a scuffle, the sick smell of burnt rubber, the clatter of a dropped phone, and then quiet, as if the city itself had exhaled. "Are you hurt?" she said later, voice small. "Only when you were gone," he admitted. His hand found her wrist again, and this time he did not let go. Third moment of tension, 510 characters. The room where she was held had the taste of stale breath and metal. Hands had rifled through pockets and left marks of greed. She had counted breaths until a shadow filled the threshold. He moved as if through water, and yet his decisions were quick, like knives. The space between them filled with the sound of a clock and the scrape of shoe soles. When doors closed in the aftermath, the silence felt like a piece of paper folded small and sharp. After the rescue, the city shifted into an altered state. Detective Ramirez asked questions with a journalist across the room taking notes. Friends, Lucia and Javier, visited, and Mrs. Alvarez brought soup. Paulo continued to bring coffee to the cafe, and sometimes Marco sat and watched Anna from the corner table in a way that felt like prayer. There were nights when he called and asked if she had eaten, and more complicated nights when he came to the small apartment bearing groceries and apologies. The gesture that tied them, a touch at the wrist, became less an accident and more a ritual. The choice remained, but now it had weight. Anna found herself in a living room one rainy night with the radio playing and Marco on the couch. He looked less like a statue and more like a person exhausted by the cost of the life he led. They spoke of simple things, of food and a story of his childhood at the docks, and of her plans for school. He offered to pay for her classes, but also to protect her in ways that made her stomach knot. Resolution and epilogue, extended reflective passage showing change, future promise, roughly 1,200 characters. She did not become someone else overnight. The cafe stayed the cafe, and the bell above the door continued to mark arrivals and departures. But people began to see differences in her. She walked a little straighter, as if learning the shape of rights she could claim. Neighbors nodded with a new softness, and Rosa, the manager, left notes with her shift times so classes could fit. Marca did not erase the dangers that shadowed him, but he rearranged them around her so that most of the threats came to him and not to her. There were arguments about boundaries, and nights when his world knocked on her door and she had to decide whether to open. They fought over small things, like a stolen afternoon, and over big things, like the language of promises. 3 months in, she enrolled in evening classes with the money tucked into an envelope that carried a careful note he had written, "Keep the quiet flame." She learned to balance ledgers and to read policy books. 6 months later, she stood at the front of a small community meeting and read a passage about ordinary courage, her voice steady and the room smelling of coffee and heated breath. Marco stood in the back at the corner table, his suit less glaring than it once was, his eyes softer, as if he had learned to keep tenderness and power in the same clenched place. He still said the phrase, "Sometimes I cannot help myself," not as an excuse, but as confession, and she would press her palm to his wrist and answer with a small, defiant smile. If you were in her place, what would you do? Would you keep the quiet life or step into a world that demands both love and vigilance? Start your reply with "I would" and tell this community why your choice matters. Sharing your thought helps others see what courage looks like in different hands, and it will shape the next chapters of stories like this one. When you are ready, come back, because the bell will ring again, and there will be new pages to turn. In the end, she chose not because he had power, but because she had chosen herself. The corner table remained a symbol, the bell a small herald of continuing work. They learned to live with a promise that was neither naive nor absolute, a promise to stand and to protect without smothering. The city kept its noise, but now some of that noise contained the sound of two people who had learned how to inhabit very different worlds and still return to the same table. The bell chimed and the cafe exhaled, and for a long while the silence between them was not empty, but full of plans. If you want to see what comes next, come back, and we will sit together at the corner table once more.